Hello, everybody, and welcome to this next installment of the FinTech Stage Digital Days. The topic is talent, still talent, and I'm very happy to have with me Marta Baldassare, who is bringing a perspective of a practitioner in this field, but a practitioner with a wide experience in different industries, not just financial services. Marta, welcome, and would you please introduce yourself, your professional journey perhaps, and how do you connect to this topic?
Thank you, Mariela. Thank you for inviting me today. Well, I'm an Italian HR generalist and manager. I've been working in HR field since 1996 when I started in France. So my entire career has been more or less at the international level in France and in Hong Kong and in China. The last 80 years I've spent my life in Italy, where I was born, in fact, in Milan, where I'm here now. Yes, my experience is mainly in fashion industry, of course, and in different contexts, commercial and corporate management. I'm really interested in this topic of talents and new generations, in fact. So I was happy for the invitation you proposed me.
Great. So why don't we jump straight into it? So talent. I mean, you're a person who have worked in HR roles, who are also a consultant nowadays, and advise companies around these topics. So, given your extensive experience, what are some of the lessons learned? You know, what are some of the stuff we do well, the good stuff? What is some of the stuff we don't do well in this space? And what is some of the uglies, the things we don't even want to talk about?
I think that now the companies are really, really very concerned about talent acquisition. In fact, what we called once upon a time recruitment manager, recruiting manager has been changed, in fact, and now we say talent acquisition, in fact. So also the names, the job titles have changed and continue to change. Human resources field has been started as a personal administration department and has gone through a lot of evolution in terms of names, but also meaning behind these job titles. Talent is crucial and is changing every generation, in fact. Now we are facing a lot of different generations within a company, in fact, starting from the boomer, which are still in the active life, because they are still retirement is still far away in Europe. So there are 4 generations in a company: the generation millennials, X, and boomers. So all these generations must to stay all together. There is a sensibility to talents, as I said at the beginning, but at the same time, it's different, and we are going through a real complexity in not really in acquiring talent, but in retaining them. So I think that the focus is really how to handle talents, young talents, how to fit with their needs. These generations are really aware of what they want, or at least they are aware of their digital capabilities, for example, and also this digital mindset make them go very fast, in fact, faster than the normal life cycle in a company. So many companies have started to draw some, we can say, induction programs in terms of getting them on board and creating 2 years path, in fact, going through different departments, for example, in order to have this sort of mindset, polymath mindset. Companies are looking a lot of talents which can work across different topics. Many companies has asked to the major universities also to create some new university courses, not really specialized in math or physics, but which can cover from philosophy to physics, to widen the mindset and the approach. So companies need to keep the pace, in fact, and to try to be closer. In fact, human resources need to be closer to the people. In fact, now we call not really HR director, but chief people officer, for example. Also talking about the change in job titles, also because people at the center of the company, in fact, and how to combine the need of business with the needs of people. In fact, also we talk about HR business partner, just always to try to combine these two elements, because the other and the two cannot coexist one without the other, in fact. So to be open, to welcome new ideas, to let them a little bit free to express, and to create the conditions also to create some side project, for example, for some specific population, of course, after some assessments, just to identify the talents, and to let them create some teamwork, some special project besides their usual job, in fact. This can bring some new blood, some new ideas also the company, and to, in a way, get them more involved in the company life.
Let me actually ask you something. I'm picking on some of the words that you're using, and this particular change of terminology we've experienced in HR. So we've moved from calling the humans in the company, from calling them resources to calling them talent. Doesn't that create a bias? What do we mean actually when we talk about talent? Is that only some people, everybody? Is it, what does it refer to? Why do we use talent as a word to describe the people and their capacity, their capabilities?
Yeah, this is a really good question, because in fact now we call talent acquisition manager, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
So do we hire only talents? Not really. First of all, because it's quite difficult, I think, to be sure 100% that the person is a talent. Sometimes you have some super very smart people, of course, and you can realize immediately during the recruitment process. But sometimes people can be talent later on. They need more time also to get involved, to get more, we can say, user to the company. And what does it mean, talent? In fact, talent is, I think, besides the IQ, of course, it's for me, it's kind of a state of mind. It's some personal skills in terms of curiosity, first of all, in terms of freedom also, the fact of being aware also of their own talent. Each person, in fact, is a talent by himself, by herself. Everybody has some strong assets. So the company, again, needs to understand, or human resources, chief people officer, whoever we can call them, must be able to emphasize and to encourage and to highlight the talent of each staff, in fact, of each person in the company. Besides the IQ, besides all the incredible capabilities. Then there are some particular people who have some more skills in terms of IQ, as I said before. And these are important for the company, but also the way you work within a group or within the company, your capability to adapt also in a smart way. You adapt to the company, you try to understand the culture, and you try to see if your values match with the culture of the company. only the IQ, I don't think is good profitable.
Representation or description of talent, yeah.
Absolutely, because otherwise it's too limited, in effect. Yeah. And the world cannot work only with talents. In fact, we need talents in terms of intelligence, in terms of smart people.
But it's interesting because the way you're describing it basically is referring to the fact that, you know, talent is a potential as well as a mix of different things. And a lot of it is about developing that potential. While at the beginning where we started is the focus that companies have at the moment is on talent acquisition, which is finding the people that have already kind of uncovered and nearly realized their potential, instead of doing the opposite and saying, how do we actually not talk about talent acquisition, but talent development, uncovering, I don't know what, the realization of the potential of the talent that we actually have as capital, rather than looking for one to hire from outside. Have you seen more, you know, kind of shifts in that area, more realization that companies are having in terms of their responsibility to develop rather than acquire?
I think a lot of companies are trying to emphasize a lot the talent retention, in fact, mostly with some empowering of training, for example, à la carte, not only in terms of typical training courses of leadership, selling techniques, and so on. Of course, these are compulsory, but trying to develop other skills and to motivate. So training is also a sign of motivation that you give to people, in fact. Also in terms of career opportunities, in fact, as I said at the beginning, the fact of being able to draw a career path or some further steps in their job life has a double benefit for the employee, who is constantly challenged and motivated, to the company to invest on people and to use and to take profit of these investments, and to make people thinking a little bit out of the box, being more flexible, because changing from one department to another, different working style, is always a plus for people, a plus for the company, in fact. So it's win-win solution. So I think that companies, little by little, they are trying really to emphasize, to put the people at the center, in fact, with all their needs. Of course, there are some cultural crash in the meantime, due to the differences in the generations living now in the companies, as I said. That generation is really challenging for us. I'm 49, so that could be my children, in fact, in a way. So they are fast, they are digital, they have grown up in a different environment. They don't feel this need of the permanent contract, for example, because they are kind of, they gave up, in fact.
Yeah.
And, but so this maybe has created a sort of, okay, I want now, I want immediately, or I wanted to see when, in fact. When I was younger, I wanted to get a job. I wanted to get a permanent job to feel myself stable. This was a little bit also parents' expectations and so on. Now, and we work 8, 9, 10, 12 hours per day. Now the new generations, the young, they are more careful to their work-life balance, for example. They wanted to they pay attention to what we are proposing them, and if what we proposing them is aligned with their needs and their aspirations, that they do not accept whatever you propose them.
Yeah,
they are very, very, I can say, confident
Yeah,
in a
I was
way.
going to say that exactly.
They are really confident, or at least they seem confident at this, and they are very, very different. And I'm really curious about that. Sometimes we get angry with them, but I'm a little bit jealous of this capability to feel what they need and to go for them, in fact, to not accept whatever we propose and to select and to say no and to take also risk, because sometimes saying no, it's a risk. But
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because one of the things, the important things, this kind of attitude is changing. It's changing the dynamic of, you know, who's responsible for what and who drives what and who has power in the relationship between employer and employee. And here we're having more and more the employee drive actually that relationship, and companies don't seem to be ready for this change in the dynamic. I don't know if you've seen people who do it better, that manage to actually create a different environment that is specifically designed for this new kind of dynamic that the young people expect. Or maybe I mean, we always have this fascination with startups and young companies and all that. Do they do it better?
I don't have enough experience or visibility to give you a precise answer, in fact. I think that the approach is completely different in startup or scale-up companies, in fact. For sure, they go fast. They decision chain is very short because very often they are not big companies. So the decision-making process is very fast. And so this maybe is very attractive for young, in fact, because it's not formal, it's besides all the leisure areas that they can offer and so on. This is okay, nice, but I think that it's not so compulsory. It's the agility. They are very agile, very rapid in decisions, and in the structures are really quite flat. And people also, I think they feel also more free. Also the fact of not being submitted to time recording and so on is also, I think, contributing a little bit. American companies, they do always. Sometimes in some companies, they've not even the offices or your own desk, sorry. You arrive and you sit wherever you find your place, like in a library, in effect. So it's completely different. Once upon a time in Italy, there was a name outside the door, so this was your office. So a lot of things change, maybe more in US, I think, as a matter of fact. And this flexibility, this possibility also to remote working is also very, very interesting, especially for this digital generation, in fact. And now,
well, especially in the times right now as well, on top of it, where we're all forced to nearly be in this kind of environment.
I've heard, followed some webinars during the lockdown and so on. And in fact, from Italian perspective, of course, and the digitalization of job environment, working environment, in not even 1 month has increased, has developed in incredible times. We should have made, in 5 years. And this has been a revolution, in fact, to put so many people from one day to another in smart working, remote working, because it was not smart. You were at home only.
Yeah.
So this from technological point of view, because a lot of people still had the desktop computer, not laptop. So some people was a problem. Some people were not performant Wi-Fi at home. Besides all the problem with the families, a lot of people connected in the same apartment with the homeschooling and so on. And so it has been a real revolution also for management, because in a few days, in few weeks, some companies had to transform their leadership. It was a shock, I think, for some of them, because management by control,
yeah,
and now it's management by trust. Wow, it's a revolution.
it doesn't happen overnight, right?
Exactly, but we were obliged,
Exactly, yeah.
especially in Italy, especially in Milan, where everything we were in lockdown. So I think that from management point of view, it has been really, really a great opportunity, in fact, to review a little bit the way of being leader in a digital, not in COVID times, in a digital era, in fact. Digital, which means everything is on iCloud and you can work wherever you want. And so people provide their work, not in terms of attendance, in terms of hours work in the office, but in terms really of productivity, in fact. And some people maybe were very happy because some people maybe they are not really morning people. So they could organize more or less, they could sleep a little bit more till 9 a.m., for example, instead of 7, and they could be more effective, in fact. Or some people did prefer to work in during the night. Well, there were a lot of meetings on Teams and Zoom, so they needed to attend to the meetings. But it has been a big change, in fact. And I hope that this way of working will be kept. Not to work only in smart, in remote way, because you need also to work close to people, in fact.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of demonstrated as well that some of the fears we had about remote work actually are not substantiated, and that you can have a very productive work environment, but it requires different way of organizing and thinking about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of companies also have tried also to support, because now, as we said, in job titles and roles in HR, we talk about also well-being manager, for example. So that started also a lot of programs in terms of trying to be closer to the people, also in terms of support. So they've organized, there was a company who organized some yoga classes on Zoom and Pilates to try to give, it was a sort of well-being benefit to the employees, also for children, and some psychological support. And they've tried through intranet and to go a little bit to adapt to this new normal. And then we will see now still on emergency code. We will see later on how things will go, and if there will be, I think that a lot of people would like to keep one day at least per week at home. But I don't know, there are some jobs that can be performed in that way, some others cannot. It's difficult. It's difficult to understand.
So if you had to give advice to an established company, of what are one or two things they can do as an employer to really create a good environment, both for young people to be attracted to the organization, but also to support the needs of the other generations that may exist, what are just one or two things you would say that they should pay attention to?
For sure, to be able to talk to all the generations, in fact, because it's important to listen to the generation, but also to the entire population, in fact, without risking to consider the old ones old, in fact, because each generation has its own personal and professional background, which has to be preserved and recognized, in fact. So the dialogue and the listening, in fact, to the needs of each of staff, of employees, it's combining with the business, of course, because we cannot forget it. I think it's the best approach, in fact, to adapt.
Yeah.
And to try to adapt it to each business, to each company size, of course, because the size matters also in terms of organization and economic financial possibilities. In fact, bigger companies can do more than the small ones, in fact. But I mean, the importance is to listen and to know your own population, your colleagues, and to understand also, always to match also with the mission and values with both sides, in fact.
Great. So I would summarize this basically customization as the key to the future of HR, where you listen to understand, you adapt, and you modify your approach to suit the different types of populations that you have in your company. So it's the personal approach to, you know, HR management in the future.
I think I'm also counselor, so for sure my second soul, in fact, interacts and complete also the HR approach. And I think it's very, very important to keep human in the center.
Yeah. So not really think of the humans as resources, but really think about the human as a human and shift away from managing stuff really, but to more caring for stuff.
Definitely,
yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. This was a very insightful conversation, and hope to see you soon again in other future conversations on this topic.
Thank you very much. Yes, another thing. Of course,
please.
I have an international background. For sure, it's difficult to talk at worldwide level because cultures are really different from a country to another. Even from France to Italy, there are quite a few differences. So for sure, the difficulties in a worldwide coordination is also to liaise also with people locally and to understand, not really top down, but also to understand and to work together to keep the general approach and the mindset of the company, and also to try always, and this is the HR who needs to do it, to adapt to the different
local cultures.
In fact, because there are, we know, many differences, in fact.
Great. Well, thank you very much for this addition as well to the conversation. Any last words? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariela.
The FTS Group builds innovation ecosystems. We engage incumbents, investors, entrepreneurs, technology partners, and regulators to build trusted and connected fintech tribes around the world. We firmly believe that innovation in financial services will truly improve people's lives. Learn more on ftsgroup.eu.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to FTS Digital Days and our conversation on talent. I'm very glad to have here with me a good friend, Neville Bourke, whom I will introduce with just a couple of words, and I'll let him speak more about himself. He's probably one of the very few people I know who are both operating in the space of HR, organizational development, but at the same time is a true rebel at heart. And that's all I'm going to say about him. Neville, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, and how do you connect to this topic?
Well, thank you very much, Mela. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you very much for the invitation. I suppose my journey to be here with you today, and I suppose to be considered somewhat of a rebel, which I take as a great compliment, thank you very much, started back in the 1980s, all the way back then, when I was a youth worker, social worker here in Ireland. And then I changed tack, and I got into HR at that stage, working in organizations. And I found myself really leading large-scale change programs in organizations of the orthodox kind, the scaling, retrenchment type, two-pay type change programs, until I found myself about 2012 working for a large Irish corporate in financial services, which was at that stage setting out on a digital strategy in terms of reprofiling its front end, its customer contact, its customer engagement, and reprofiling the entire organization to be digital first, great people when you need. And through that process, I got to practice and experiment a lot about what it was to be a rebel in an organization and to harness the power of rebels in a very long-standing 250-year-old deeply embedded culture of sustaining the status quo type of an organization, type of culture, and that sparked my interest in rebels, in minority influence, as a means of driving change from within rather than imposing change from without. And I suppose that's how I've arrived here with you today, Mela. It was in that context we first encountered each other.
So I thought it was an interesting kind of angle to take to a conversation on talent, rather than talk about talent in general as the skills and the people who have them, to talk about exactly the attitudes around talent that we don't talk often. And that's why I invite you to have a conversation on rebels and how do rebels fit into our thinking around talent and fit into bigger organizations. So maybe, you know, let's start first with just, when we talk about rebels, what do we actually mean? Who are the rebels?
That's an interesting question, Mela. In thinking about this interview and coming on, I asked myself that same question. You know, what do I mean by a rebel? And of course, the answer that I arrived at is that to be a rebel is different and is a different definition in every organization. You know, rebels kind of depends on who you are, the organization that you work in, the context of that organization, and your level and display of ability to display power in the organization. Fundamentally, for me, everybody can be a rebel, okay? And we see it in people's lives outside of organizations continually on a daily basis, where in different contexts, people display both leadership and dissentient attitudes and mindsets when they're provided with the right framework and the right context in which to do that. The idea that and rebels are a small cohort of very special people is only true insofar as that's what we see. But I believe that the propensity to be a rebel and to display rebel type thinking is innate within everybody. And it's about finding a way in which the organization can tap into people's ability to be innovative, to learn, to display growth mindset, to have dissentient thinking is, I think, one of the lesser emphasized and invested in attributes of HR professionals and talent managers and talent professionals across organizations. For me, the rebel is whomever we want it to be, and it's about harnessing that rebel in our organizations. It's a difficult thing to do. It's easier to talk about it than it is to achieve it in our organizations, but certainly in the work that I do with a number of colleagues in organizations across different sectors today, that's very much what we focus on, which is how do we strip back those cultural attributes and organizational mindsets that inhibit rebels displaying their, what I believe to be innate creativity and innovative thinking.
Great. So I guess there's no point of me asking you whether we need rebels in the organization. So instead, let's talk about, you know, you spoke about harnessing them. So how do you harness rebels and what do you harness them for?
You know, very often we're working in highly regulated environments. So whether it's financial services, med tech, med devices, pharmaceutical organizations, large organizations with deeply ingrained cultures operating in highly regulated environments. And of course, the regulatory environment itself influences in favor of the status quo. We're also, you know, we create what we call these double binds for people, where they are encouraged to align with and sign up to and live the organization's values. And at the same time, we ask them to express themselves authentically. And of course, there's an inherent contradiction in that. We create this double bind. and we create choices for people, neither choice of which is a good choice. It's either comply with the values as they're espoused on the posters on the wall, or it's to they're exhorted to express themselves individualistically and authentically, which then at times can put them seemingly in competition with the values of the organization. So there are paradoxes in organizational life and in organizational culture that hinder rebel mindset, rebel behavior, and rebel activity. So one of the things that we think we need to do is to think about concepts like polarity thinking, whereby understanding that these double binds are tensions that people feel in the organization. There's the tension to be compliant, through which being a success on the terms of the organization is necessary. And then there's this tension to be a rebel, which is to be creative and to be innovative. Firstly, you've got to understand that the organization in many respects is creating this double bind, and it's how do you move beyond the double bind. So one of the things we've really found interesting in terms of harnessing powers and energy for rebel thinking and rebel behavior is to use processes like action learning, where people step out of their normal day-to-day role, typically in which they are solving technical problems. So there's relative agreement about the type of problem to be solved, and there's relative certainty about how to go about solving that problem. And to bring them into a context whereby small groups can come together in action learning sets, and they can focus on adaptive problems, not technical problems. They focus on adaptive challenges facing the organization. And they're typically far from certainty about what approach should be followed by the organization. And there's far from agreement about how we might go about solving these adaptive problems. In this context, action learning provides a platform to unearth what we would call dissentient thinking. Everybody's capable of dissentient thinking, but in their day job, they're not motivated, structured, or framed to be dissentient. But when they step into the action learning set, we find that pretty soon into the process, as they start to think about their wicked problems from an adaptive perspective rather than a technical, we're unleashing a lot of that baggage that they carry about how they're expected to think in their day-to-day roles. And it's this that we think provides a framework in which there's permission in an organizational context to be a rebel. There is leadership sponsorship for rebels to start exploring and innovating and thinking beyond the orthodox. Merely telling people to be unorthodox is just to create a double bind, and that creates tension within the organization. But creating a platform where people can be dissentient in a safe environment, properly facilitated, is to us that safe space in which this rebel activity can be both sponsored, nurtured, cultivated, and over time achieves great power.
So this is a great way, of kind of getting people both to connect with their inner rebel, but also to, as you were saying, to basically create a space that the organization recognizes as the space for the dissentient thinking. But what happens if you need to incorporate this in day-to-day jobs as well? So how do you create the structures, the mechanisms that make it possible to have this abrasion in the day-to-day jobs and not just in environments that are specifically designed for it?
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's this, what's the connection back from the action learning set to bringing that back into the day-to-day reality of the organization. And that's where we try and look at the characteristics of the rebels themselves. So while I say everybody is capable of being a rebel and having dissentient thinking, to be a successful rebel in an organization and bring it back into your day-to-day job is actually to be a rebel as a leader, and it requires the rebel to be quite politically astute, is the word that I would use, about bringing back their dissentient thinking into the organization. I mean, to be a rebel is to adopt a political stance, whether it's in society or whether it's in an organization. And rebels, you know, who are not politically astute really become rebels without cause, incapable truly of, I think, leveraging their dissentient thinking as a positive force for change. And what they do is they set themselves up really as a focus for resistance and as a group to be resisted. So we focus a lot with rebels on helping them understand the political context in which they're operating, both in that safe space in an action learning set, and then how they might migrate back into their day job and bring elements of their thinking with them. And we find that the action learning set prepares them for that, because the action learning isn't just about solving the wicked problem and creating the space for thinking. It's actually about being reflexive rather than just reflective. And it's about thinking about the environment and the organization as a whole and how you come back and operate in that environment. I think it's fair to say that some rebels are more successful at that than others. But this is action learning is a talent process in which you can identify those people who've got the political nous to be able to translate the dissentient thinking that they're doing in the safe environment and bringing it back into the, what I would call, less safe environment of the day-to-day. Of course, the other thing that they need is they need leadership sponsorship, right? It takes a very special rebel to be able to operate in an organization as an individual who doesn't have an umbrella of leadership sponsorship. Typically, though, what we see leadership hierarchies doing when they observe lots of action learning sets going on is they have a different lens through which to select emerging talent in their organization. And they start to create that blend of orthodox career mindset and the rebel career mindset. And then you start to create this true diversity of thought in an organization, because it's always about balance. The rebels aren't always right. What the rebels do is they contribute significantly and in very important ways to the conversation that's taking place in the organization. But conversations are two-way, always. You know, an individual rebel on their own can't have a conversation if they're isolated. They need to have conversations with people who are doing the day job. So we start to see that importance of that leadership sponsorship, that talent filtering and identification that happens in parallel to the normal promotional processes that are typically moderated by HR, in parallel now with these action learning sets where we see the dissentient mindsets emerge, selecting those with the political nous to be able to be inserted and implanted in key decision-making points and points of influence, roles of influence in the organization. And it really is a game of chess. It's about putting the right chess pieces with the right balance in the right places in the organization to create that future-focused change narrative across the entire organization.
Yeah, so let me just, summarize a few of the important things you said, because I want to take us to slightly different places. So I think what I found very interesting is this reformulation of the rebel as not the person that is there to resist and be the resistance, but the person who is there to adapt and be the chameleon more than anything. The bringing of the different voice into the room and the voice that challenges the status quo, but as an add-on to existing voices, not as the right voice necessarily, but creating the diversity of the thinking. You shared as well a number of different techniques in which both individuals as well as leadership in organizations can start creating space for these rebels. the thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit more is that, so how do you go about doing something like this? If you're an organization that is conscious that needs to inject new thinking, diversity, in order to be more adaptive, in order to be more responsive, in order to be able to deal with today's world of complexity. But currently you are a conformist organization, an organization with a strong culture that is quite rigid. How do you go about adding this degree of freedom, and what needs to change, and in what sequence?
Yep. So my response to that is this: the organization needs to protect its rebels from becoming critics. So there's in regulated environments, in organizations of long-standing, typical what we see as a critical culture emerge. Everybody gives out about the status quo, but nobody does anything about it. And the rebel runs the risk of being subsumed into that if they're not smart about it. Organizations and leaders, and particularly senior leaders, need to start by asking questions, not by telling organizations what they need to do. There is this concept that we live in the hyper-deterministic age right now, where we're not prepared to let something emerge, not quite knowing what's going to emerge. That seems like a level of ambiguity and uncertainty that orthodox leaders are uncomfortable with, because it feels like a loss of control. So the first thing really I would say is leaders need to become comfortable with the idea that they are in charge, but not necessarily in control of outcomes. And there is a differentiation to be made between the two things. The leader who's comfortable being in charge, but not necessarily focused overly on continuously being in control, will ask the organization questions rather than feeling the urge to provide statements of dubious certainty about the future. The asking of questions starts to allow for different voices to be heard, because people will respond in different ways. The innate rebel will respond differently to an open-ended adaptive type question to the person who's stuck in the closed mindset with an orthodox mindset. Starting with those questions starts to see a dynamic emerge whereby I think leaders can then identify the initial seeds of that kind of core minority that they start to utilize and deploy into their action learning sets and processes like that. Once you start to get that up and running, the other thing that leaders need to be prepared for is a relatively high level of failure. Now, what do we mean by failure? Of course, we all subscribe as talent professionals that true development takes place in a context of desirable difficulty, where individuals are prepared to try and fail, but in the failing, there is immense development and there's learning taking place. Normally, we construct our talent processes in organizations to be success focused. You're not successful in the talent process unless the task has been successfully executed, regardless of what development took place. So there's a second layer of ambiguity and uncertainty that leaders need to embrace in fostering rebel activity, which is the activity itself has its own value, regardless of what the outcome is. If you require the outcome to be highly predictive in terms of task success, people will never go beyond where they have gone before with their technical approaches to problem solving. Therefore, you've got to really give them the freedom to fail. It's not arbitrary failure. It's not failure without purpose. What you've got to create is development processes that may or may not lead to positive outcomes in terms of task solution, but definitely lead to positive outcomes in terms of talent and rebel development. that requires very sophisticated leaders who are prepared to invest where the return on investment isn't necessarily seen in advance. And it takes a remarkable set of leaders in an organization to start sponsoring this. And I would say to rebels in organizations, you know, regardless of where you are, you've got to seek out and find those expansive, sophisticated leaders, and you've got to cultivate their sponsorship. Whether they're sponsoring today or not, they may become sponsors once you seek them out. The other thing I think you've got to do is the questions have to start flowing two ways. You know you're on the right maturity path when the organization is testing its own strength by measuring the quality of the questions people are prepared to ask leaders, rather than just testing the quality of the questions that leaders are prepared to ask followers. And you've got to create this two-way flow, because the development for both, the development for the leaders and the development for the followers, happens in that point of coming together where they're sharing questions and they're co-creating their answers for the future.
So it's interesting because in this dynamic, you know, the starting point you had is really the leadership and the responsibility of the leadership in starting this process. Is there a way to start the process the other way around? So what if you are in an organization where, you know, leadership needs to be cultivated first to a point where the sophistication appears? How can that happen?
So I think what we do there is well, there's certainly two approaches. I mean, there's always top down and there's always bottom up. And these processes are happening in organizations simultaneously. We certainly look at concepts like minority influence in terms of doing the bottom up and, you know, working with certainly more junior levels of the organization around how they can start to create dynamics in an organization. What we do, though, is in terms of influencing the top down, is typically starting to work with HR functions about how they may adapt their talent development programs to be less directive, less consumption focused, where the organization is worried about the content being consumed in the leadership development program. And we start to create what we call these open-ended co-creation type development programs, whereby the talent itself identifies and creates its own content for its own development. So, you know, this is probably one of the more difficult challenges, because HR functions are very vested, their purpose and their meaning, and to a large extent their power, is vested in how they create these leadership development programs. It's how they control the talent pipeline, and then it's how they control very important power dynamics, such as promotion and the appointment of senior leaders. Getting HR to understand that they've got to change the design principles away from directive prescriptive development and into more open, co-creative and adaptive type development is critical in an organization.
So this is really HR acting as a center of gravity for this process. And I think if you think about as well how the shift in HR responsibility is happening, and the fact that, you know, administrative stuff is becoming automated and moving away from the function, even things like recruitment that were traditionally part of that role are moving away. This certainly opens up a new space for HR. So HR more as literally as an organizational development function, and thinking about the ability of the organization to renew itself.
Absolutely. So what I would say to you about that is HR functions face a challenge where they constructed many of their toolbox tools in the past in this hyper-deterministic model, whereby it was about typically selection, and selection happened early. We select who enters the development program, and we design our development programs to be extremely expensive. Therefore, we have to ration the program's availability. What we work with organizations about is how do you create mass participation opportunities? And HR moves away from selecting upfront and, in a sense, moderating who has access at the early part of a program, to creating programs where the design principle is that it's cheap, it's cheerful, it's opt-in, it's open, and it creates mass participation. HR then plays a different role in terms of organizational development. It's about observation. It's not about selection. And it's about letting capability, it's about letting leadership attributes, and it's about letting dissenting thinking emerge and then selecting for further investment at that point. The great thing about this is, there are few analogies between the world of sport and business that don't break down because they're very different contexts. But actually the concept of mass participation, allowing you to see the entire talent pool and to see, individuals' capabilities and motivations almost in freestyle emerge, is a hidden power that HR has. But HR's history in terms of doing selection early, because we've designed expensive programs, very often, mitigates against HR playing that role of observer. It's like moving from being having power to having influence. It's about letting go to actually to be able to achieve more, and that's an important dynamic for HR functions as well, around sponsoring rebels. It's not about selecting rebels. It's about creating these open platforms, games, opt-in type scenarios where people's innate motivation to participate, enrich their jobs, bring their different skills, mindsets, their dissenting thinking, the stuff that very often they live vicariously in their private lives, whether they're involved in sports clubs, coaching, other creative pursuits, that this allows them to bring this aspect of their whole self into the work environment. This is a big challenge for HR. It's a big challenge for leaders because it feels like a loss of control. But actually what it is you gain massive influence over the entire talent pool rather than just focusing on narrow segments of the talent pool.
Great. Well, Neville, I just want to ask you for any sort of closing words, remarks to either the rebels out there or the HR people that may be listening to us, or some of the leaders that may be actually finding themselves in your description.
So I think that to be a rebel is to be a leader. And, we always say these things like we have leadership at all layers of the organization, and it's within the compass of everybody to be a leader. Yet we tend to focus all our processes and our HR tools on the hierarchy, where we give people positional power and positional leadership. For rebels and their supporting HR functions to really create an environment in which the rebel is valued, not as the only role that a person can play and the only mask that a person can wear, but as one of the roles and one of the attributes that everybody can bring to their organizational environment on a daily basis. It requires a radical rethink about our talent processes. Talent is seen as exclusive, and we create these exclusivity-driven processes. Actually, what we have to create are these embracing, encompassing, inclusive type processes that are open access. And I would say to rebels, as an individual, focus on your political nous, and, the idea, the dissentient idea in your head is only a dissentient idea until you learn to navigate the organizational context, culture, and politics, and the power dynamics that allow you bring that idea to some form of fruition and influence your organization. It's a very interesting topic. We love it. We spend 365 days a year thinking about it and working with organizations on it, and be resilient.
Thank you very much. This has been a great conversation. I must say I am starting to think my own position around leadership. something that I've been resisting all my life as well. So maybe I need to start embracing it a little bit more. Thanks a lot, Neville. I hope this has given people some inspiration as well of how to think about their own organizations. And looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much, Mela. It's been great talking to you, and good luck to all the rebels out there.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
The FTS Group builds innovation ecosystems. We engage incumbents, investors, entrepreneurs, technology partners, and regulators to build trusted and connected fintech tribes around the world. We firmly believe that innovation in financial services will truly improve people's lives. Learn more on ftsgroup.eu.
Hello and welcome back to the FTS Digital Days and our conversation on talent. I'm very glad to welcome a good friend, Achim Wolter, with me here. Achim, would you just say a couple of words about yourself, your background, and how you connect to this topic on talent?
Sure. Hello, Mela, and great to also see you again. Yeah, I'm responsible as the head of, we call it PUD, People and Organizational Development at the Baloise Group, so Center of Competence in Group HR, responsible for everything from talent management, leadership development to organizational change and transformation.
So basically talent is your job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're right in the middle of the topic already. And so I'm really, throughout the whole day, more or less thinking about how to best promote the development of talent in the organization as part of, I'd say, our organizational development. And probably interest for you to hear is Baloise, as a mid-sized European insurance company, is really trying to differentiate also through its people and its culture. And therefore, I think it is of very high importance. And our strategy, if you want to summarize it in short, is really happy employees lead to happy customers, lead to business results. And therefore, so my task is how to really make sure that we have happy employees in the sense of that, they feel they evolve and develop inside our company.
Yeah, so it's worth noting for everybody who may not know Baloise, of course, that you guys have been on a journey for the last few years to strategically reposition yourself to be relevant in the future. And as part of this journey, which involves a whole bunch of different things, not just where to play and how to develop really the capabilities that are required for that future that you want to be in. Talent has been really a significant strategic chunk of work and thinking, and how talent creates the capabilities that allow you to be a player in the future. So it may be useful, for everybody, if you can give us a little bit of background, what is your thinking as an organization around talent? How do you even define talent? And then structurally, what are some of the different elements of things that you do in the space to create the necessary environment for it?
Yeah, I think it's an important point, first of all, to clarify what we mean when we talk about talent. Yeah? In our organization, we're saying everybody has talent. Yeah? Not everyone is probably a talent in the classical sense of talent management. Yeah? And we also have our talent pools. But I'd suggest when we now talk about talent, we use it in the broader term, in the sense of that we really need each and every employee as part of our transformation, and to make sure everyone is on board, both in terms of the skill and also the will, the motivation to contribute to our transformation. So that, I think that is the basic understanding that we have of talent. And now, when you ask what are we doing or how do we put it at the center, first of all, we've talked about our strategic journey, and we've set ourselves the goal already 4 years ago that we wanted to be amongst the 10% leading employers in our industry. And we measure that with a partner in an engagement question where it's about employee recommendation. Would you recommend Baloise to others as a place to work? And we started out being part of the best 30%. Last measurement, end of last year, was 15%, and we're just about to running the survey where we hope to now reach the 10%. So really, I think that we must be doing something right there. And have also during this Corona crisis, and that's maybe also a topic we should cover a bit, seen a very high appreciation from our employees about the environment that we create. Apparently a good combination of security, safety on the one side as an insurance company, but also on the other side, stretch and development. Yeah, and probably that's where we could dig a bit deeper.
Yes, so how do you create that stretch and development for people?
Yeah, but first of all, I'd say for us, learning and development is a strategic priority. Yeah, we have what we call a Baloise story. So it's kind of a narrative that our CEO shares with the organization whenever he's talking about our journey. And as part of that story, we very much emphasize, in fact, when it comes to the competencies we need to build, that we need to learn, that we need to collaborate, and that we need to take ownership. These are the three areas. And so if you put that together, a lot of what we're doing is about self-determined learning and development. Yeah. So instead of just telling employees where they should now build which competencies, what we believe in is that employees probably know best themselves where they could build additional skills, and just are working towards creating an environment in which that is possible, and where they feel motivated and inspired to build their own additional capabilities.
Great. So how do you then manage this self-directed type of learning environment with the typical career choices that exist in an organization? And did you have to adjust not just career management, but other things around to cater as well for this different approach to training?
Yeah, luckily we've never had these very classical career paths. Maybe in sales, yes, or in claims, but in some functions. But broadly, we have never had a very thorough or rigid structure, which we needed then to take down. So it was always possible to move also across the organization quite freely. And what we just had to do is stimulate mobility. And I think highest success we had not so much with the classical long-term mobility, so taking a position elsewhere, but rather what we call short-term mobility. Yeah, so we've promoted an instrument for a couple of years now already that we call change of perspective, where it's really allowing the employees to maybe work 40-50% of their time, whatever it is, for some month in another area in addition to their existing job, maybe replacing maternity leave or whatever it is. So if I have a gap, I can openly flag that in the organization, and then I get volunteers. And then it's a bit like this shifting puzzle. So if the gap is then somewhere else, then this person again can then also offer a change of perspective. And so you get a lot of short-term mobility. Sometimes that then ends and leads to also a change in roles, but it does not have to. But people acquire different points of views, learn, get to know the organization from different sides and angles. And I think that has stimulated mobility much more than the classical long-term approaches.
Well, this is very interesting. Could you give us similarly an example of how you've created this more self-directed learning environment? What are some of the mechanisms perhaps you've implemented?
I think we're still in the process of doing that, and you need to experiment with that. And I think the most interesting experiment we're just doing at this point in time is that in one part of the organization, we communicated that we would give employees 10% of their time free to learn and develop. Yeah, and understanding learning development for the LD people as the 70-20-10. So everything from formal to informal learning. And the idea was not so much to really allocate now 10% of the time, but rather give a signal that there is latitude for the employees to learn as they want, and in alignment with their leaders, and as part of our performance and development management, which we call continuous dialogues, something many companies have turned to. And now we've tested that for 6 months. Just a couple of weeks ago, did the final survey, and it came out that first of all, it had not been abused. People really, very responsibly acted on that. Probably not the entire 10% were really used. It was maybe 5% on average. Also in these Corona times, obviously used for a lot of digital upskilling by the people. And now the idea is, and we're just in internal discussions, to roll that out or deploy it then also to the whole side of Switzerland, and probably the entire group then, if the decision is then made by our board. And that was really one of my highlights the last month, because it shows that people really, they're willing to invest in their learning when you show it show them that it's their choice, and it's a bit twisting it around. It's not forcing people to learn for a certain percentage of their time. It's offering them the time and the opportunity to do whatever they want. Yeah, and in addition, we've learned, that's maybe also important, that you also need to do some level of strategic competency development as part of your strategic discussions in the organization. So we have a very simple, let's say, you would say a strategic workforce planning approach in our organization that is just giving orientation. Where are we going? Which competencies are more in need for the future? And then people can really choose and start learning wherever they feel that is helpful to them. Yeah, and a lot of that, maybe just one addition, is also on digital learning. So we have very early on started to work with the company license of LinkedIn Learning, which is emerging as a new standard, I would say. So it's providing the space and giving people the opportunities to also learn, not just informal learning, but really at the point, at the moment of need.
I'm going to pick on something you said, because even though it's not directly related to talent itself, it's an interesting way of how you're approaching the problem, experimentation. So you said you're running an experiment, and depending on the results of that experiment, you decide what you do. Can you talk a little bit more? Why do you experiment?
Well, it's one of these moments where, honestly, how to further develop self-determined learning is not an easy question. It is deeply ingrained in our culture, and I think no PhD department can claim these days to already know the answer. So, and we see that more and more. So what we do is really we understand also these kind of projects, and this project is called Learning Organization, as a portfolio of experiments. So this is just one of the experiments that I just shared with you. There's a couple of others, like we're seeing about would mentoring and developmental mentoring do much more sense? We can further promote the changes of perspective. Many other activities, reverse mentoring, we're thinking about, and so the start is always that we come up with some hypotheses. Why would that work? Why would that make a difference? We then try to also, during the experiment, measure and see, does it fulfill these expectations? And if it does not fulfill the expectations, we stop them. We try to do that also early. Yeah, and if it's like very much on the innovation side. Yeah, the process will sound familiar, but you can apply absolutely the same thing in HR.
Amazing. Now this is really an interesting point of view, because we just had a conversation as well with Neville, and you know Neville very well too. And that was one of the things that he was pointing out that is particularly important for organizations nowadays, is to learn how to ask questions, and not necessarily to treat an environment as a deterministic environment in which all the answers are known. So you're taking basically the same approach to designing HR and designing the organization.
We just learned one thing that's maybe interesting to add with this experiment I just mentioned, the time to learn. We also realized after 6 months of experimenting, we could not, in a ROI sense, really prove the point. We could see that it was positively perceived. We could see that there was a benefit. And so then we approached management and said, that's maybe a difference with innovation, I don't know. Yeah, but in the end, it's about a leap of faith. Do you believe that going further in that direction will be in line with our people orientation, our culture, our story, etc.? Then let's opt for it, even if we have not been able to prove the last 20%. And we could now continue to experiment for ages, but that would probably not change anything anymore. And at one moment or another, you need to jump as well.
Yeah. I'm afraid that happens in innovation as well. Sometimes you do have to have a leap of faith and, set your levels of confidence at the beginning of, what error margin is okay to live with and when you should actually jump. I wanted to talk a little bit more as well about, specifically the area of leadership and strategic leadership in the organization, and how your thinking around this has been shaped as well, because that's a specific kind of talent that you need to have in the organization.
And I think we've especially focused at the beginning of our journeys, the first couple of years, on our leaders. Now we've broadened it, as we were just discussing, a bit to all the employees. Yeah, but leaders, as you say, have a special role in the sense of that they are also the ones who are then transmitting a lot of their development then to the rest of the organization. We always talk about role modeling, but when you want to change culture, when you want to change behaviors, when you want to change the way how leadership is understood in the organization, you need to start with the leaders and not just the lower level leaders, but these are easy in a way to win for the transformation, but also the top management. So those who have made the longest part of their career in a completely different setting.
So what do you do with them?
Yeah, I think one thing that probably, let's start at the top, because that's probably the most interesting place. When we went on this journey, we realized that our top management needed to also learn new skills, and maybe even more importantly, change the way of how they look at the world, a frame of reference, you could say. So we've used a lot learning journeys. We've taken our leaders from other companies several times. Every 2 years or so we're doing that, to also showing them how the digital work functions. We included them in design thinking workshops. So all these kind of activities that would stretch their own thinking and help them understand that the world is ticking differently. I mean, it starts all with awareness, and only when you're aware and when you then see a need, you then start to change as well. So I think there we've invested quite strongly, and today also the way how the leadership team interacts, how they're taking decisions, etc., has changed quite fundamentally. You wanted to?
Yeah, I just wanted to exactly reflect on the fact that so one of the things that Neville, for example, was mentioning is the importance of senior leadership having what he called a complex leadership capability. So the capability to lead in ambiguity and be able to keep a space in those ambiguous times. And I think in your case, you've actually put quite a bit of effort in developing the capability of your leadership team to have conversations where, they can hold the space even in times of ambiguity, which is very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And also, you've invested effort in having different decision-making processes and increasing their conscious choice of different decision-making processes to help in this type of situations.
Yeah, let's maybe start with it, because that's two topics. With the first one, what we have been using a lot is this word of the ambidextrous organization. Because I don't know about other industries, but in our industry, we still have parts of the organization that function quite traditionally, where also the needs have not changed so much due to regulation, etc. And then there are other parts, like for instance, where we're deep into innovation, where we're completely working with agile setups and the whole different operating system, startups, etc. And so we always use this metaphor of the piano, where we're saying there's just new keys now on the piano, you remember that because we already used it a couple of years ago, but still we were working with that because I think it's a nice metaphor, and it says very clearly, yes, you still need to also in some instances master the old skills, but there are many new skills, and that's where you need to put the emphasis for your learning, because the other ones you manage already. Just pushing, in our organization at least, the leaders towards everything that was old was bad and it's not needed anymore would not have worked. So it's more this and then this just do more of what you know less about. That it's like an invitation on this learning journey, and that has worked quite nicely. The second thing, you talked about the decision processes as well. I mean, there's in particular the integrative decision making that has helped us a lot. We've forgotten to know it as part of these learning journeys as well that we did a couple of years ago as a decision process for complex situations where this linear root cause thinking does not lead you anywhere. And especially in these virtual times now, that has become extremely helpful, because it's a nice way to also structure a conversation where otherwise opinions, questions, judgments, concerns would all go mixed one in another. For those who have not heard about it, it's coming from sociocracy, and it's an interesting approach where you just have asked people or leaders in a row to first ask the comprehension questions and then to state in fact their reactions, and then it can be integrated by the person making the suggestion. And then in the end, you ask whether there is any objection. And so it is more consent-oriented than consensus-oriented decision-making. It involves everyone. It's very much in line with Swiss culture. Everybody has a say. Yeah, but you cannot, in the classical sense, veto anymore. Because there's also the possibility to say, yeah, I would not do it like that, but I'm not having anything against. I can live with it in that sense. Yeah, let's go and try it. And that has worked nicely, and I think unlocked many strategic discussions that otherwise we would have had much more difficulty getting out.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the fact that, you know, you're using the ambidextrous organization as a way of explaining as well the different types of needs that coexist for the organization at the moment. How do you manage the tension, and how do you manage in particular the talent tension, the different kinds of people that you need in the more innovation, fast-paced side versus the more traditional regulated side?
Yeah, and that's not so easy because we have different parts of the organization, different, I'd say, profiles. Yeah, so many of our employees, I'd say, are even ahead when it comes to our management. So there's always this certain percentage of early adopters that really enjoy the latitude they now have. They take ownership. They're the ones, in fact, we're looking out for. I mentioned ownership as one of the principles of our story before. Yeah, but then there is another part whom we call internally in our language the sleeping beauties. Yeah, so the question, and I think it's a nice one, how to kiss them awake. Yeah, because they're maybe not used to taking ownership themselves, and they may see reactions of fear when it comes to change, but still it's not that they're against. Yeah, so we just need to provide the psychological safety necessary, and we need to also inspire them and maybe show them the rational. It's different approaches there, but it is feasible to take these people on a path to also start to take ownership for their development and for the development of the company.
So how do you create, you know, that sort of psychological safety across an organization? What are some of the things that you, at least in your roles, can do to provide some stimulus for it, at least?
In the end, it's probably not the role, as you say, of a PD department, but it's a way how the culture in the organization evolves. We have, for instance, just to give you one example, we have also a community where people can connect bottom up, people that are well connected. We call them also kind of influencers you have in the organization. We call them our sparks. Yeah, and we've given them complete autonomy to develop the behaviors that they would want to see our company more emphasized more strongly. We now call that the Baloise Code. So that is something that has not been developed top down, but bottom up, is coming out of the organization. And it's their voluntary mission to now promote these kind of behaviors. These are things like speaking up, for instance. So if something is happening that is not okay, they bring it on the table, mention it. So you ask how to create this psychological safety. And I think there you need a culture of dialogue. People need to dare to speak out. And that we're promoting, I think, quite strongly through our values that are promoted bottom up, not only top down.
What about, you know, many organizations that are in your sort of position, that are more incumbent organizations, are worried nowadays about attracting rare talent, keeping rare talent, having the young guys, you know, the data scientists, the AI people, the hackers, the entrepreneurs, you know, somehow joining the organizations, and being very worried that it's very difficult to attract them, it's very difficult to keep them. So is this a problem for you, or how have you been thinking about this?
It is an issue. I think we have had less of an issue retaining the people who are with Baloise, but because once you experience that culture and the contact with the other employees, we have no problems keeping the people, at least not so far. Attracting people or a talent is a bit more of a challenge, given that we're not the strongest brand name, also based not in Zurich, for instance, in Switzerland, but in Basel, which is a more remote location. So in that sense, we had to work on our employer branding, and we've done quite a great job there, and with blogs, with innovative stories. And by now we've, I think, been able to transport this this notion of being an innovative insurance company, also the way how we handle employee branding. Yeah, and in a broader sense, I would say where we are now turning more and more towards is the word of employee experience. So looking at our organization just from the customer's eyes, also through the employee's eyes, and ask ourselves, how do we perform as a company towards the expectations that our employees have? And try to then identify, for customers we'd call it touch points, but the touch points we have with our own employees, and improve them in a way that they really fulfill their expectations. And here we've continued to measure, in fact, in that sense, already the last years, together with our ambition to become part of the leading 10% of employers. We've really made progress, and people appreciate it, for instance, quite strongly in the Corona crisis. With it was not seen as a given at all, but rather something that was strongly appreciated, that we were in a matter of weeks giving people the latitude to work from home and install the infrastructure and all that stuff.
I know that you also have a couple of startups, and I find this actually an interesting way for you to attract as well more entrepreneurial talent and have them in an environment which is familiar to them rather than immerse them directly into the company. Do you want to say a couple of words of how that works, and what's the interaction between the startups themselves and the talent that sits there with the rest of the organization?
I think the most interesting point there is probably that typically when it was the case with Friday, but also with MoveU and some of the other startups, that when they ramp up, it's an opportunity to bring in internal talent as well into the startup space. Yeah, and then typically these people then tend to come back a couple of months, years later, depending on how long that is, and share then a lot of these more agile approaches and ways of working with the inside of the organization. We, for instance, had a leader in Friday who then now became in group IT part of the guild of, we call it BizDevOps, business development, and then now is moving on into claims in Switzerland. And so really sharing this knowledge. So that I think that is what's the most important thing. Attracting people who, if you're in that startup space, you'll probably then stay and not go in a corporate environment. We need to be honest about that. Yeah? So these kind of people, then there's more fluidity, but that's completely okay as well. Yeah? So it's not our goal to retain them as long as possible, but really have the opportunity to win the talent we need for our innovation. And I think that has been working nicely so far.
I think the cross learnings are really important, and I've seen in particular, the cross learnings that happen at the leadership and executive level. So, the founders of the startups and their ability as well to share some of their thinking and their learning with the rest of the leadership of the organization. So that kind of happens on all the levels.
Yeah. And it was, for instance, there was an interesting moment where the leader of one of our startups then discussed with the board and shared with them how did they perceive the way how negotiations work with our corporate function. Yeah. And it was a whole slide. I don't know whether you remember that
yeah.
Involved there. It was a whole slide of interactions, and I think it played like a mirror, and helped the organization understand, oh, you can do things in a much simpler way as well, compared to how we are used to as a corporate.
Absolutely. Well, the last sort of question I wanted to ask you to share with people is, what role does the people and development part of the organization play in all this? So if you would be talking to colleagues of yours who are starting on this journey, what would be your advice in terms of the role they should be playing in this?
It depends a bit probably on the industry and on the leadership team as well. What we've chosen as a role is, I think we're a mixture of a facilitator. We're always saying we're neutral in that sense, because there needs to be someone who's looking at it from the perspective of the entire company, like a CEO does. And so we're not the advocate of the future or just of the transformation, etc. We are more creating a platform and providing spaces in which change can then happen, because people need to have dialogues and discussions around it, and somebody has to hold that. And that is how our role has emerged. But I can imagine in a company that is going through a much faster transformation, that PUD can also play a more transformation office role. Yeah, but then you need to be aware when you become one party, then you'll also face more pushback and you'll be also seen as having more of known agenda. Our choice so far, and there was a good one, has always been to be in contact with all different parties and not judgmental in that sense, but really just creating platforms for dialogue, like these leadership journeys we just talked about.
Great. So any sort of last words of wisdom from your experience and your journey to anyone that is going and starting with their own strategic rethinking of their talent programs? Any do's and don'ts?
No, but just be aware that employees have to be at the heart of each and every transformation strategy these days. Yeah, and many companies still see their employees in a much too transactional manner. So just make sure that you really are employee-centered and employee-oriented in everything you're doing, and then think employees will do half of the transformation for yourself by themselves.
Right. So treat your employees the way you would treat customers and really design.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Achim. This was a very exciting and interesting conversation. I hope it was very useful as well for our listeners. Thanks again for taking the time and being with us, and looking forward to seeing you soon again.
You're welcome. And thanks, Mila. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.